Hello, everyone, and welcome to Aaron Shack Politics as we seek to dissect the results of the 2024 presidential election. Let's look at a few things. One of the things that I tried to analyze during our election coverage on November the 5th was I was counting numbers, especially between 2020 and 2024. I was getting like a relatively accurate count of like how many people voted for Biden in 2020, how many people voted for Trump in 2020, and combining those numbers to get a total of 155 million or so. And trying to compare that with, the approximate number that we have right now, as votes are obviously still being counted, but obviously we have the projection that Donald Trump will win this election. But I pulled up those numbers, and of course it's changing over time. But I added the totals of who's voting for Harris and who's voting for Trump, and I got about 140 million. Okay, and back in 2016, the total was 128 million. So we have 128 million, 155 million, 140 million. So that's over the past three elections, right? So what changed? Republican candidates won when less people voted, more people stay home, right? So, I mean, some of this is reflected in the data. We know that already, that there are some districts where Kamala Harris should have gotten larger numbers and ended up getting smaller numbers than what Biden did when he went through. And we were seeing a lot of that via the magic wall from CNN with John King and his coverage, just showcasing that essentially Trump took a lot of the blue collar workers that Biden was able to lasso in, and Harris was not able to simply inherit those people just because she's a Democrat. I think a lot of those people went the other way because this election or this past 4 years has really hurt their pocketbooks. Gas prices went up, the cost of groceries went up. Everyone feels that. It's really tangible. And, you can say inflation's going down as much as you want. We can talk about the economy and stock market trade values and stuff like that. And, at the end of the day, it doesn't benefit the average Joe that's just there working. So that's one thing. And we'll keep an eye on those numbers. But, I mean, it just looks like significantly less people voted this election than last election. So to put that in scope, I had about 67 something million for Harris, 72 million for Trump, and I'm just rounding these off, to make it simple for you, for 2024, right? But Biden and Trump back in 2020, this was historic turnout. 81 million for Biden, 74 million for Trump, right? And then, of course, in 2016, 65 million for Clinton, 62 million for Trump. Now, what happened there? Oh, Clinton has bigger numbers. She should have won. No, she won the popular vote, as did Biden. But Harris did not win the popular vote, and she didn't even win the Electoral College, which is what really counts, okay? That's what really gets you the win here. So let's talk about a few other things as we attempt to dissect the election. I think one of the big ones is a lot of people said that Joe Biden wasn't a good candidate due to his age. Joe Biden is 81 years old. Donald Trump is 78 years old. Now, they have mentioned that Joe Biden has significantly aged in the past 4 to 8 years, and we are seeing it as we analyze his speech patterns, right? So he's aging as any normal person would. Now, Donald Trump at 78, his speech patterns are deteriorating. So we did legitimately sub out one guy, one old man for another old man. That is just as aging and potentially demented, essentially saying that Donald Trump probably has some sort of diagnosis of dementia or some symptoms of dementia where he can't recall names properly. He's mixing up names of people, saying that certain people were in charge of something else. He's just mixing people up, right? So that is an issue. So just an important detail to point out that I don't think the age thing really mattered because it was really just a debate between which older guy. And then, of course, once Harris entered the race, nobody started criticizing Trump's age and comparing it to Harris's age. That argument just completely died off. It might have been just sort of a tool to get Biden out of the race. Now, next, I have something from David Pakman here. We're going to actually pull up Twitter feed here. And David Pakman tweeted here, as we speak, progressives are turning out due to understandable despondency over last night's results. I won't speak about others, but I've lost 10,000 YouTube subscribers overnight. When the right loses, they fund operations like Turning Point, invest in media, etc. If we abandon now, we cede total control to absolute lunatics. Not a good idea. Now, if you don't know David Pakman, he's the host of the David Pakman Show. He is a progressive host and commentator of his own show. I think it's just fascinating to know this. I mean, I think we know that a lot of people were obviously let down by the results of the day, and that can often lead to, okay, I just want to tune out of the whole political machine. I want to cancel my subscriptions, my memberships, and stuff like that. You know, let me just focus on something external, you know, focus on my job, focus on reading books or playing video games or something like that, you know, just sort of focus on what you can control. But it's precisely these times that you actually need to be more involved in the political machine, and being apathetic or just disconnected from the political machine is a luxury that really only the rich and the powerful can do. So, I mean, essentially, it disgusts me in a sense, because it represents a certain amount of privilege that if you can check out of the system and say, well, everything will be fine because I'm this, I have this, my race is this, my upbringing is this, my, you know, what class I am in is this, you know, a middle class, lower class, upper class, whatever it may be, right? That is a luxury that most people cannot disconnect from the system. So it is important that we are all involved in the system, regardless of who wins and who loses. Being in there, making your voice heard, helping other people get out to vote. What this means is that a lot of people stayed home because they either thought it was easier. They either thought, oh, well, I'm in California, Texas, or whatever, and my vote doesn't count because there's a majority of X in this state. Well, wrong. Get out there and vote. And so people do that, and people see the line of how long it takes to vote, or they think, oh, I forgot to register, I didn't get all my address and stuff up to date, or my ID isn't current, or all these various things that can get in your way and be tiny little hurdles, whether it's waiting outside a voting precinct for 5 hours or 2 hours or 10 minutes, whatever it may be. We have to get out there and we have to do that. And I think the other thing that Pakman is sort of mentioning here is that when the right loses, they double down. They get more podcasts out there. They get more involved. Donald Trump calls into Fox News and talks and talks and talks, and he never shuts up. And he's on social media all the time. There's constantly videos being made. You may hate him, but the machine never stops, right? And there's commentators, especially on the right-wing side, that are lobbying to young men, especially 18 to 29. That range right there, that age range is being constantly targeted, whether it's Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate, you know, folks at the Daily Wire, whatever it may be. And, you know, there are obviously progressive and left-leaning outlets as well. You know, you have Pakman, you have the Majority Report, you have Hassan Piker, you've got all sorts of people, right? And they are speaking out about the importance of these issues. They're getting in there, they're getting interviews, they're talking with voters, they're taking call-ins and all sorts of things to maintain that conversation and make sure that people are educated and that they are also deeply involved in the issues. Not just being educated, but being involved and knowledgeable and able to discuss the issues and talk about them. And to be able to, you know, voice your opinion and share it. So, next thing I have just sort of speaks to the idea that Trump doesn't really have a lot of his staff, right? A lot of the staff that served with him in 2016 and the years preceding, as he gradually rotated people out, don't have very kind things to say about him. It's interesting here in this Variety article that we can pull up that this ex-Trump staffer, Alyssa Farah Griffin, who is a host on The View, a co-host, said that she voted for Kamala Harris. She said, it's the first time in my life I voted for a Democrat. So she did confirm that during The View's Election Day episode that she voted for Kamala Harris, marking the first time in her life that she's backed a Democratic nominee. She said, 4 years ago today, I was in the White House with Donald Trump on election night. I believe he deserved to lose that night at that point. I thought he hadn't fought to win the election, but I thought the next 4 years would be the Republican Party rebuilding and becoming something I could believe in and turning the page on Donald Trump, and it didn't do that. So this weekend on Saturday, for the first time in my life, I voted for a Democrat. So she was probably looking at what happened with Biden, you know, specifically 4 years ago, right? And she said she considered her vote a loan to Kamala. She said, I worry that the direction that Donald Trump will take this country, and I take my own warning seriously. She also said, I need someone who is a kind and decent person who will bring this country together. I don't agree with a lot of her policies, and we can criticize that down the road, but today is about the best thing for the future, and the future of the country is that Donald Trump will lose and Kamala Harris is elected. Obviously, this was before the results of the election, but I think it's just important to bring her perspective in on this. So yeah, she's a lifelong Republican. She's making it very clear that this is the first time that she's voted for a Democratic candidate. So, speaking as a former senior aide to Donald Trump, who knows him very well, this is the most important election of our lifetimes, which we do hear that a lot, but it is also true. Because he is the most dangerous man to have ever sat in the American presidency, he cannot go back. So, interesting perspective from her. What the results currently show here as of the time of recording is that Harris is at 226 electoral college votes and Trump is at 295, well over the 270 needed to win. Now, let's look at some other stuff while we're here. I mean, well, we could do very quickly just point out some of the reasons why. So, Nevada and Arizona, at the point of this recording, they still haven't really gotten a firm full reporting and full count here, but it is clear by the math that Donald Trump will lead in these states. It's important to note that Kamala Harris was able to maintain New Mexico and Colorado, but here are the issues. Some of the battleground states, Georgia, right? Florida. Florida is often noted as a swing state, but easily Donald Trump. But Georgia got fairly close, pretty close. Virginia, usually quite a battle to win that one. Pennsylvania was the biggest one that we were watching last night because without Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris could have gotten Nevada, could have gotten Arizona, could have gotten a lot of these other states up here in what we call the blue wall. But losing Pennsylvania would have been consequential to the election. She wouldn't be able to do it if Donald Trump won this. So this is what really seals the fate here. But also Michigan was important, which, once again, it's all pretty narrow. It comes down to hundreds of thousands of people. That's why your vote really counts, is because it could be that 100,000 that makes the difference. And so if you decide to stay home and your buddy decides to stay home, and because he decided to stay home, someone else stays home, and because you're all part of a social group, that whole group decides to stay home, and then someone else online sees that your whole social group stayed home and they think, well, they didn't go, so I guess it doesn't matter. It's a chain effect. If we all think my vote doesn't count, eventually that adds up. Okay? And it can be disastrous for either side. That's why I advocate that it's important that you vote no matter which side you're on. But yeah, these were ones that we were deeply concerned about. And so Trump winning Georgia, which was blue in 2020, something that Biden was able to turn and make blue, that didn't happen. And what does that mean? It means in a lot of these areas, the turnout was not what it needed to be. Now, that's not blaming any specific race, but it's just a fact that certain people came out and certain people did not. And Kamala was not getting the majorities, or Kamala, sorry, I get mixed up sometimes. Kamala was not coming out with the majority that she needed to have in the same way that Biden did. And they might have taken it for granted. They were definitely out there. They were definitely campaigning. The Obamas went there, all this great stuff. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the issues. It comes down to, did this candidate in this short amount of time, were they able to convince enough voters to make it happen? She really only had over a month or so to really get in there and let people know. And I believe there are certain things, especially in Michigan, where she got rid of, essentially deleted the Muslim and Arab vote with some of her comments that we'll talk about later in the show. But that's a big deal. Now, we'll briefly turn to the Senate because the Democrats lost 3 seats. The Republicans gained 3 seats. And of course, Bernie Sanders over in Vermont, the independent candidate, he won his race over there quite easily. Kirsten Gillibrand wins in New York. Elizabeth Warren maintains her seat in Massachusetts. Chris Murphy in Connecticut. Let me see some other notable folks here. Yeah, you have Amy Klobuchar maintaining in Minnesota. You have Josh Hawley maintaining his seat in Missouri. You got Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee maintaining. Rick Scott wins his race. Ted Cruz ends up beating Colin Allred by almost 10 points. 10%. You have Ruben Gallego beating Carrie Lake in Arizona. She was one of those election deniers that spoke with Donald Trump. Adam Schiff maintaining California. Cantwell maintaining Washington. Tester losing in Montana. John Tester. Okay. So, with the White House and the Senate, and it's looking like potentially a majority in the House, we'll have to see how all this pans out. And it's quite possible that midterm elections could go one way or the other on that. Always seems to happen. And then, of course, them having Republicans having more governors. And, of course, not every governor was up for election here. But you can see that Josh Stein was able to win North Carolina. And you were able to see that a lot of Republican candidates were able to either maintain their seats or win. So, an interesting race overall, but this total defeat, both in the popular vote and in the Senate and potentially in the House, really sends a strong message here. So, moving on to what other things we have to talk about here. It's also important that you vote because presidents can shape the all-powerful Supreme Court for decades. Some of the people that Donald Trump has chosen to put on the Supreme Court are relatively young people. They will be there for decades. And so that means that even after Donald Trump is long gone, a lot of the policies and a lot of the people that he nominated into those spots will be there throughout our lives. So that's why voting matters so much. The Electoral College means that if you live in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, etc., swing states, battleground states, as they like to call them, your vote matters. I wouldn't say more is the word, but it's definitely very consequential at that point. And the popular vote really really sends a strong message when the candidate is able to not only just win, but to also get the popular vote, because it is an overwhelming, megaphone of letting everyone in the country know, like, this is how we're feeling. It speaks truth to power in an essence, and it's letting people know whether you're in that party or not. It's people that are often up and voicing displeasure, or they're passionately rallying behind their candidate of choice. And also 33% of eligible adult voters don't show up or are unable. So imagine if they did. Imagine how the vote would change. Most Americans and your neighbors are good people, but politics can be quite ugly. And this is another thing that I bring up quite often when I'm talking with others. It's that we can't disconnect with the world around us and the people that we know in our lives simply because we disagree on stuff. And it's really polarizing when we can't agree on the basics, like, human rights, human decency, things like respect for the various races around the world. We can't agree that the genocide in Palestine is wrong. If we can't agree on some of these really basic things that can offend people so deeply because it hits on a personal level, it really does come down to the end of the day. It's the politics, because you can meet good people that are on either party, either side of the spectrum, or independent voters. You can meet both good and awful people in that sense. Now, Benjamin Franklin, can't say words here, said, "A republic if you can keep it." He said that in 1787. He was answering the question that we are not beholden to a monarchy, a king, or queen. And it's also clear that the Founding Fathers also mentioned that political parties would eventually become so split and so biased and so corrupt that it would essentially unhinge democracy, right? And we are kind of seeing that, where parties don't want to work together on bills. One party will say, no, we're not going to pass that. We're not going to let you do this. This immigration bill is dead in the water until our candidate gets in office, because it's going to make our candidate look good, right? So we see stuff like that, and that gets in the way. That's not in the Constitution. Political parties are a tradition. It is not a rule. So it is important to keep that in mind, especially when you disagree with what the various political parties are doing, whether you're in the middle or if you're a Democrat that simply disagrees with the direction that the party's heading, which more on that as we head deeper into this episode. Now, this was just kind of an interesting poll that came up leading up to the election. This is courtesy of Zeteo, August 14th, 2024. I just wanted to bring this up because it is a vital part of the conversation. New polls suggest Gaza ceasefire and arms embargo would help Dems with swing state voters. So the YouGov IMEU Policy Project poll found over a third of voters in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia are more likely to vote for a Democratic nominee who pledges to withhold weapons to Israel. Now, what did Kamala Harris and Joe Biden do? The exact opposite. So we've seen a whole year of Joe Biden continuing to arm Israel. We have seen the genocide. We have seen the occupation. We have seen the apartheid. We have seen the International Criminal Court put out a warrant against Benjamin Netanyahu. We have seen the various crimes that South Africa put on display during the court's hearings, showcasing the war crimes that were committed and all the wrongdoings that have been done, and the fact that it is not a war. So if we scroll down a little bit here, we see that in Pennsylvania, 34% of respondents said they would be more likely to vote for the Democratic nominee if the nominee vowed to withhold weapons to Israel, compared to 7% who said they would be less likely. The rest said it would make no difference. In Arizona, 35% said they'd be more likely, while 5% said less likely. And in Georgia, 39% said they'd be more likely, also compared to the 5% who would be less likely. So what does that mean? In some of these battleground states where Kamala really could have used a boost, some people stayed home, or they voted for the other candidate, or they voted third party. Now, you could add up all the third party votes. It still wouldn't give Kamala Harris a win, even if everyone said, you know what, I'm going to vote for Kamala anyway. There's no reason we should vote third party. It still wouldn't guarantee the win. So being mad at third party voters is not the solution in this context. This is wholly on the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris. So the results were particularly stark when looking at responses by those who voted for Biden in 2020 and are currently undecided. In Pennsylvania, 57% of such voters said they'd be more likely to support the Democratic nominee if they pledged to withhold additional weapons to Israel for committing human rights abuses. In Arizona, 44% said the same. In Georgia, 34% said so. Now, some of these may not be just large, astounding numbers, but that's still a large portion of the electorate that you are leaving. And those people could be sitting at home, could be those very people that we said, hey, the turnout looks a little lower this year. It's obviously more than it was in 2016, but obviously not as many Democrats. Only about 2 million more than Clinton had. So in some ways, it is a repeat of 2016. It's that Harris was able to get a little over 2 million more votes. Obviously, that number might change, but it's just important to note. So think about it. This polling clearly shows that if the Democrats want Vice President Harris to be the strongest nominee possible going into November, then they should be demanding that President Biden stop the flow of weapons to Israel and secure a permanent ceasefire immediately. Not only are these policies popular, but they actually move voters from undecided or the not voting column and into the Democrats column in states Democrats will need to win. So the warning bells were sounding. It's just that Kamala Harris had her hands over her ears, and she chose rather to say that she is speaking rather than the people chanting in the crowds to stop bombing. The Harris Walls campaign said, essentially, not literally, if we don't commit genocide, someone else will. There's your meme. There's your meme right there. So, if we go back here, I have a few more things I want to point out. So yeah, some of those polling numbers not really relevant to the discussion. But she was leading by small margins in Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Georgia. And obviously Michigan is a huge, huge location with a lot of Arab and Muslim voters that were just completely, left out to dry. And they either voted Trump as a protest vote, or they stayed home and didn't vote at all, or they may have gone out and voted for Jill Stein, as she was the only non-genocidal candidate in the election. So they say here there are still many questions about the Harris campaign's stance on the Israel war on Gaza. She has served alongside Biden as he's maintained largely unconditional support to Israel, and she has as much of a pro-Israel record as many other American politicians, while Harris has expressed overtures sympathetic towards the scores of Americans horrified by the war and the hundreds of thousands who in the primaries voted uncommitted in protest of U.S. policy. And while she still serves as Biden's vice president, she has yet to affirmatively make clear what policy change she would pursue. And I think that is a very big mistake. Because it's not just saying that the Arabs and Muslims and people with family in Palestine or people that are looking at what's happening in Lebanon, Lebanese people are potentially, they're living in the states that may have, a home back in Lebanon, seeing their properties be bombed, seeing people be murdered. They're looking at that. It's also the people who are not them. It's the rest of us Americans that are here and saying, wow, this really doesn't look right. It looks like we're on the wrong side of history. And the way I look at it is factually true. The amount of death, the amount of innocent men, women, and children, civilians that have been killed in this and have been expressly targeted, which I will get into in other videos surrounding the Israel-Palestine genocide of Palestine issue. So I think another big thing is that she didn't allow any Palestinians, no one from the Uncommitted Movement, no Arabs, no anyone was allowed to speak at the DNC. And that basically sent a very big signal to people that care about this issue. You don't matter. We don't need your vote. We don't want your vote. And, even if you look at the polling and say, oh, it's only going to matter this much in this state, it's still going to matter. It'll matter more than the polling can show. So is this entirely why she lost? No. Is it a big reason and a valid one not to ignore? Absolutely. So last week, organizers of the Uncommitted Movement said they requested a meeting with Harris to further discuss their demands of an arms embargo and a permanent ceasefire, and that Harris shared their sympathies and expressed an openness to meeting. Harris's national security advisor later clarified that Harris does not support an arms embargo on Israel. So there you go. And we did, of course, see online that there were videos of Harris having ads in some states where there are more Jews, saying that she would continue, making sure that Israel is armed and protected and safe. And then in other states like Michigan, she was trying to roll ads saying that she would move for peace and an arms embargo and all these various things. So she was actually caught playing both sides. And that also has an impact on the voters. And that word gets out fast with the internet, as quick as it can. As soon as those tweets and videos started circling around, absolutely. And we might be able to find a clip here.
Before Russia attacked Ukraine, I met with President Zelensky to warn him about Russia's plan to invade. I helped mobilize a global response, over 50 countries, to defend against Putin's aggression. And as president, I will stand strong with Ukraine and our NATO allies.
Interesting.
To the war in Gaza,
President mention.
Biden and I are working around the clock because now is the time to get a hostage deal and a ceasefire deal done.
All just posturing. Wasn't enough to win voters.
And let me be clear.
We can believe.
And let me be clear.
We saw through the lies.
I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself.
There's the truth right there. Playing both sides in the same speech.
Because the people of Israel must never again face the horror that a terrorist organization called Hamas caused on October 7.
There you have it. Let me see if I can find the ads. Yeah, here we go. This was from Australia. Let me see if I can find.
Annalise Nielsen is live for us in DC. Paul Murray is still in Texas. He's a man after my own heart there.
To get through the next week as a country, not just as a candidate.
2 days until we decide the fate of our nation. We were born for such a time as this.
Yeah, not what I was looking for. Okay. That's fine.
Here's the ad U.S. presidential candidate Kamala Harris has been running in the state of Michigan, which has a large Muslim population.
What has happened in Gaza over the past 9 months is devastating. We cannot allow ourselves to become numb to the suffering.
And here's the ad she has been airing in Pennsylvania, which has a significant Jewish population.
I will always stand up for Israel's right to defend itself.
Yeah, just playing both sides of the same speech as we saw in context.
Spot the difference? Well, a CNN investigation has revealed that Harris has been promoting different messages on Gaza and Israel depending on the Muslim and Jewish populations of the state she's advertising in. While Harris's Facebook ad targeting Michigan aims to gain votes from Muslims, her ad in Pennsylvania is designed to win the support of pro-Israel Jewish voters. The CNN investigative
She just wants the most votes, which, you know, for a politician,
ads based on each state's demographic
sense.
makeup, and reveals how Harris's speeches are edited to fit the narrative of her different ads, with her commercial in Pennsylvania purposefully omitting her highlighting the suffering in Gaza, which she called heartbreaking in her Michigan ad. Will these tactics aid her in her quest to win the race to the White House, or will they make voters dubious about her true stance?
That's very true. Definitely something to consider. Now, another thing that's been brought up is, you know, some people have said, you know, maybe this isn't the time for a female candidate. Maybe it comes down to issues like racism and sexism and bigotry across the United States. Now, it's possible that some people vote that way, but we have examples here that prove that re-election for Tlaib and Omar, the first Muslim women to serve in U.S. Congress, they were able to win re-election and continue their political careers after being the first two Muslim women to serve in U.S. Congress. So we can see here Democratic Party's Rashida Tlaib, who is the one and only Palestinian in Congress, and Ilhan Omar, also they are the first two Muslim women. They have won re-election to the U.S. House of Representatives. Tlaib, who is also the first woman of Palestinian descent there, re-elected Tuesday for a fourth term as a representative for Michigan with support from the large Arab American community in Dearborn. Omar, a former refugee and Somali American, retook her seat for a third term in Minnesota, where she represents a strongly Democratic 5th district, which includes Minneapolis and a number of suburbs. A leading critic of U.S. military support to Israel in its war on Gaza, Tlaib ran uncontested in her primary and defeated Republican James Hooper to represent the solidly Democratic district in Dearborn in Detroit. Omar thanked her supporters for all their hard work in the election campaign. She believes a better future is possible. Can't wait to make you all proud over the next 2 years. They're both members of an informal group of lawmakers known as the Squad, which is made up of progressive members of Congress, including Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, among others. Other Squad members, Jamal Bowman of New York and Cori Bush of Missouri, both lost their party primaries against opponents who had won substantial support from the pro-Israel funding group, the Anti-Israel Public Affairs Committee, or AIPAC. The group has invested more than $100 million in U.S. political races this year in a bid to silence pro-Palestine voices in Congress. So, just important to note that, you know, Gaza was most assuredly on the ballot, and people were definitely considering who is authentic and who feels like a corporate politician, someone who is there because they are backed by corporations and corporate funding, and they're backed by super PACs, and they don't really have a leg to stand on. So that authenticity comes through. And even Biden, Clinton, and Harris, they are all known as corporate Democrats. Now, next, Bernie Sanders has a tweet on the 2024 presidential election results, and I think he has a really solid take here that we need to bring up. He says, just in the tweet here, this is before we even get to the letter, he says, it should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they're right. Okay, so let's head over here, and we will take a look. Okay, I don't have that sized properly. But yeah, this is the whole tweet. I'm going to actually pull this up. Oh, that might actually work. Hang on. That's a little better. Sanders' statement on the results of the 2024 presidential election, November 6th, Burlington, Vermont. Senator Bernie Sanders, we've got that, released the statement, outcome of the 2024 election. It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. First, it was the white working class, and now it is the Latino and black voters as well, as we can see in Georgia, for example, right? He continues, while the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they're right. Today, while the very rich are doing phenomenally well, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and we have more income and wealth inequality than ever before. Unbelievably real, inflation accounted for, weekly wages for the average American worker are actually lower now than they were 50 years ago. So imagine that. People are making less than their parents did. Today, despite an explosion in technology and worker productivity, many young people will have a worse standard of living than their parents, as I literally just said, but getting back to what Bernie's saying, many young people will have a worse standard of living than their parents, and many of them worry that artificial intelligence and robotics will make a bad situation even worse. Today, despite spending far more per capita than other countries, we remain the only wealthy nation not to guarantee health care to all as a human right, and we pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We, alone among major countries, cannot even guarantee paid family leave and medical leave. Today, despite strong opposition from a majority of Americans, we continue to spend billions funding the extremist Netanyahu government's all-out war against the Palestinian people, which has led to the horrific humanitarian disaster of mass malnutrition and starvation of thousands of children. Will the big money interests and well-paid consultants who control the Democratic Party learn any real lessons from this disastrous campaign? Will they understand the pain and political alienation that tens of millions of Americans are experiencing? Do they have any ideas as to how we can take on the increasingly powerful oligarchy, which has so much economic and political power? Probably not. In the coming weeks and months, those of us concerned about grassroots democracy and economic justice need to have some very serious political discussions. Stay tuned. So that is Bernie Sanders and his statement on the 2024 presidential election. Powerful. next, I want to pull up what Dr. Jill Stein, a third-party candidate, has said here. So she's obviously speaking from a place where she is rejecting the two-party system. She says, once again, the two-party system has delivered a disastrous result for the American people. Now we must continue the uprising for people-powered politics and demand the world we deserve, which will never be delivered by the twin parties of war and Wall Street. And she does have a point there, but she's obviously speaking with a motive. The Democrats have no one but themselves to blame for losing to Trump again after their decades of failures and betrayals that paved the way for Trump's rise in the first place. I mean, a lot of that's true. She's definitely going to come in and be really harsh, but I think someone needs to hear the tough talk here. From their unconditional support for the endless war machine and genocide in Gaza to their subservience to Wall Street, corporate Democrats, right? Back to what she's saying here, to their indifference to human rights, to their reckless acceleration of the fossil fuel pollution driving climate collapse, which once again, the Democratic Party was supposed to be the side that was actually about getting something done to stop climate change, while the Republican Party pretends that climate change doesn't exist. But here we are. She is pointing out that Joe Biden, corporate Democrats, are actually pro-fossil fuel. Even if they run on something different when they get into office, that's, they're betraying us. So, to their assault on democracy, on all these issues and many more, the Democratic Party has betrayed the trust of the people. And it's easy to feel that way. And that's why you have to sculpt, after this failure, you have to sculpt a new party. You have to get out there and communicate, and we have to get different people in power, and people that aren't going to just take money from large corporate donors. They're going to tell them to vote a specific way that is alternative to what the people vote them in for. So she said, Jill Stein continues, this election removes any remaining doubt that the Democratic Party has utterly failed the people it claims to represent, and that we need a genuine opposition party for people, planet, and peace. Over the past year, we've continued our long-term efforts to build a movement for peace, for a livable planet, and for all the countless millions of people in America and around the world who have been neglected and abused by the parties of war and Wall Street. The momentum we achieved despite the pervasive media blackout threatened the Democratic Party so much that they set up an unprecedented operation dedicated to the suppression of our grassroots movement. So she's kind of speaking about some of the issues that the Green Party has run into. They harassed us with expensive lawsuits to kick us off the ballot, marginalized and smeared us in the media, posted job-seeking people to sabotage our campaign, and even launched attack ads against us, something they'd never done before for any independent challengers. So that speaks, even though the third party really didn't get more than 0.4% of the vote for a lot of them, it does speak that the Democrats do feel threatened, which I think could be good. That could speak to potential change. I think it is important when you have rival companies, corporations, businesses. It's important to have competition because competition drives innovation, and without it, they become complacent and they do whatever the hell they want. So, these unprecedented attacks against us by the corrupt political establishment backfired madly. These attacks inspired a whole new multiracial, multi-generational coalition of voters, organizers, and activists to join forces with the Green Party, and that coalition will continue to grow. And, as someone that's not really, I've never really voted third party, I think it's interesting to see that it's growing, and I think that could be a good thing. It could be good to have more voices in the ring, and I think we need more things like this. We shouldn't be driven by the battle to the bottom with two political parties that are giving us, the worst candidates, old guy and older guy, And then because one steps back, due to aging, and, we get another candidate shoved in with Harris where we didn't actually vote for her, there wasn't a primary, even when she was in the primary back in 2020, I mean, she couldn't even garner enough of the vote. She was not popular. So the fact that she was just kind of shoved in and everybody was like, vote blue no matter who, rally behind her, let's go. The Republicans don't really have a vote red or you're dead, or there's no equivalent of vote blue no matter who. They don't do that. They find a good candidate and they stick with them, even if it's Donald Trump, who is obviously what I would say would be like a horrible candidate. But he does win, and while he doesn't meet all of his promises, he does tend to basically make sure that he delivers on certain things. So I don't think I'm going to read the whole thing because I think it just kind of harps on that. But I think the key thing to understand here is that the political establishment is quaking in their boots, as she said. She says that there are solutions to end the genocide in the empire and to adopt a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy, all things that America has rejected as they have supported Israel unabatedly, even in the wake of the International Criminal Court and the UN standing against them and saying, hey, we need to send aid, we need to do this, we need to do the right thing. America and Israel always staunchly vote against. So I think it's important that we highlight that. I think it's important that Democrats probably need to learn from that, like it or not. It's some tough talk. The Uncommitted National Movement does have a little statement there. I just wanted to highlight a few things here. So I'll start reading from this. I'm going to pull it up as a... Well, it doesn't look like it's going to size it perfectly, but I'll read from it here. Post-election statement from Uncommitted. The outcome of this election is not a reflection of Donald Trump's appeal. It is a sobering reminder that the Democratic Party has lost touch with the very communities that once fueled its progress. This defeat is not simply about policies or candidates. It underscores a deeper disconnection from our values and our people. While there are many factors at play, one undeniable truth remains. Neglecting the voices of those impacted by war has consequences. When we turn away from these communities, we risk losing their trust, their support, and their hope for a better future. For Arab and Muslim Americans, this election was profoundly personal. Many have watched in anguish as American-supplied Israeli bombs have fallen on loved ones in Palestine and Lebanon. Our calls for understanding and action from Democratic leaders have too often been met with silence. Instead of standing with us, we saw an unyielding alliance with leaders like Netanyahu endorsing policies that perpetuate suffering and despair. For many in our communities, Biden's legacy is now defined by war and grief rather than hope. In this vacuum, Trump lied and positioned himself as a pro-peace alternative. Now, we all know that's not true, but that is what he put out there. So whether people fall for it or not, she goes on to mention that Trump lied and positioned himself as a pro-peace alternative, an illusion that has emerged from our party's failure to see us. As the statement continues, Arabs and Muslims, alongside young anti-war voters, have fought not just for policy, but for presence, for the straightforward acknowledgement that their grief is as real, their children as beloved, their stories as sacred as any other. To be ignored by those meant to represent us, to have our calls for dignity met with willful silence, leaves an emptiness deeper than politics. As we watch Israel's government drive millions from their homes, the Democratic Party's vague calls for a ceasefire feel hollow, like thoughts and prayers after a mass shooting. Netanyahu's genocide is happening in plain sight, backed by President Biden and Vice President Harris. Netanyahu's brutal project of mass expulsion is nearing completion, creating a post-ethnic cleansing reality that cannot simply be undone by ceasefires or incremental steps. The Biden-Harris administration bears a tremendous responsibility to correct course now before Trump returns to the helm, solidifying these irreversible changes. Today, our message is clear. The moment requires more than resilience. It demands decisive action. The Biden-Harris administration must put an end to the flow of weapons that fuel this cycle of violence. If they do not, the Democratic Party risks straddling our coalition of voters with the ever-increasing weight of a legacy intertwined with endless war and suffering. Now is the time to listen, to reflect, and to forge a path that truly embodies the values we profess and represent, values that resonate deeply with every community feeling unheard and betrayed. Lastly, it says in quotes, "Not another bomb." Powerful statement from the Uncommitted National Movement. And I will have links to all these things I'm bringing up in the description down below. I have a statement here on Twitter from Nihad Awad, National Executive Director, Council on American-Islamic Relations, the largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization in the U.S. He tweets here, Kamala Harris is losing 2024 elections because of her support of the Israeli genocide in Gaza. AIPAC's money didn't help her. She underestimated the Muslim voters, students on campuses, and Americans who care about Palestinian lives and freedom. And I think a lot of what we looked at today really proves that to be true. Now, one thing you can expect, I suppose, from Trump's administration is that RFK Jr., Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is going to be very controversial if he ends up being in some sort of health cabinet position here.
Clearing out the corruption in your terms, would that mean clearing out the top-level federal service workers that are currently at the FDA and the CDC?
In some categories, I would say.
What does that look like? Yeah.
In some categories of workers, there are entire departments, like the nutrition departments at FDA, that have to go. That are not doing their job. They're not protecting our kids. Why do we have Fruit Loops in this country that have 18 or 19 ingredients, and you go to Canada and it's got 2 or 3?
Would you eliminate any of the agencies?
To eliminate the agencies, as long as it requires congressional approval, I wouldn't be doing that. And I can get the corruption out of the agencies. This is what I've been doing for 40 years. I've sued all those agencies. I have a PhD in corporate corruption, and that's what I do. And once they're not corrupt, once Americans are getting good science and are allowed to make their own choices, they're going to get a lot healthier.
You say clearing out the corruption in your terms.
So he does mention some things that are actually kind of interesting, is the fact that Fruit Loops actually has a lot of not necessarily just dyes, but also chemicals to achieve the colors that are in the cereal. And in America, we have all these chemicals in our food, but you go to the UK, you go to other countries, and they say, oh, this is actually bad for you. This is dangerous. We're not going to have this in our food. So he does have somewhat of a point there, but does it mean that dismantling the FDA entirely, or, you know, sort of rooting out and trying to find these people that aren't doing their jobs properly, whether they're being bribed by these companies or whatever it may be? The Food and Drug Administration, food safety is important. It is what keeps us safe, and, you know, these products are tested and made sure to be safe. But obviously we're not getting that anymore because we are seeing the cancer rates rise, and that is due to what we're eating, what's in our food, the chemicals, the preservatives. All of this stuff is proving to be bad for our health, and it's not problems that we used to have. Just keep hammering this in. I saw a tweet here that is attached to the Kamala Harris video where she says, I'm speaking, and I believe that this is the moment where I think a lot of people solidified, especially because she was speaking in Detroit, Michigan. A lot of people solidified the idea that she is not a candidate for us. The arrogance, the entitlement, the lack of empathy, speaking down to voters who were protesting for the people in Gaza. This was the moment she lost the election. That's what some people say, and I would potentially agree. I don't think you can narrow it down to just one issue, but I think if we've hammered home anything important in this particular video, it's that, yeah, she absolutely has completely alienated Arab, Muslim, and people that care about Palestinians and the Lebanese that are being bombed and killed. Genocide.
Against the climate crisis, and he intends to end the Affordable Care Act. You know what? If you want Donald Trump to win, then say that, otherwise I'm speaking.
He won anyway. So that may have pulled as popular in the focus groups. It may have gotten wild applause there. You know, the stern prosecutor, angry teacher model may have worked in this moment around a very specific group of people, especially women. It didn't win the election. And this rubs people the wrong way. And that's how power corrupts. Right there. Just like that. Just like that. And that's how you can be driven mad with power. So once again, that just kind of brings out the issue here with the I'm speaking while people are saying, you know, stop the bombing, you know, don't do this, you have to do something. There has to be some sort of ceasefire. Not happening, not on her watch. If we don't commit genocide, someone else will, you know, that meme once again. But we do have something that is a little more leaning towards good news. It's not a lot of good news if you're left-leaning on this election here, but a lot of states here, 7 states, passed measures that were either protecting or expanding abortion rights. And I have, you know, a couple different sources that we'll bring up, but CNN here, of course, projecting that Montana, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, Nebraska has a bit of a debate here. Missouri, Maryland, and New York. So, some of these states, like Arizona and Missouri, were looking to expand abortion access, while others, like Colorado, Maryland, Montana, Nevada, and New York, were looking to maintain abortion access. And then in Nebraska, there were dueling measures because obviously they have multiple seats and multiple measures. So that's complicated. I guess we'll see how that pans out. But it is very interesting. Now, what does it mean? For example, in Missouri, they're voting to approve a measure to enshrine the right of an abortion up to the point of viability in the state's constitution. In South Dakota, they were rejecting a measure that would have guaranteed a constitutional right to an abortion with regulations during the first and second trimesters. Nevada voters approved a measure that would establish the fundamental right to an abortion up to the point of fetal viability in the Constitution. Montana was voting to approve a measure to amend the state's constitution to protect the right to make decisions about one's own pregnancy, including the right to an abortion through fetal viability or when needed to protect the pregnant patient's life or health. Arizona voters will approve a measure to enshrine the right to an abortion in the state constitution up to fetal viability. Colorado voters will approve a measure to enshrine the right to an abortion in the state constitution. Maryland approve The measure to enshrine reproductive protections, including the right to end a pregnancy, in the state's constitution. New York approving a measure that would amend the Equal Protection Clause in the state's constitution to say that a person's rights cannot be denied due to pregnancy, pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy. Florida measure to protect the right to an abortion up to the point of viability will fail, as CNN has projected in that sense. So, abortion right is passed in 7 states and fail in 3 others. So, Maryland, Nevada, New York, Arizona, Colorado, Montana. And then, yeah, we did have some in Florida. So, it's just such a tricky issue. But I'm glad to see that some states were able to step up and make decisions. I think a lot of people rebutted the loss of Roe v. Wade as well. It's going back to the states, and the states will decide individually. Well, you're going to have states that are going to be safe for abortions, and then you're going to have other states that are going to be unsafe, and women are going to feel unsafe in those states because they won't have access to proper health care, and if they are having a baby, it's going to be very disadvantageous to be pregnant in that state, just based on the viability of the pregnancy. If anything goes wrong, you could very well die if you're in Texas, and that is terrifying. So, that's what I have for you today. This is Aaron Shack Politics. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos and live streams. We did do a live stream of the election 2024 coverage. It was really interesting and very enjoyable, and I think we learned a lot, and we dove into a lot of difficult conversations, and I think it was much needed. So if you're enjoying the content on the channel, let me know. If there's any issues or anything you'd like me to cover, just let me know in the comments, and just stay tuned, and I'll have more videos out about all the various issues that I want to discuss. I think some of the big things that we'll be talking about in the future will be, what do Democrats need to do? What do Republicans need to do moving forward? And I think you're going to have to hold both sides accountable on this. And I think it's going to be a very rough but very interesting 4 years. And, it may not be the outcome you wanted, but hopefully we can make some changes from here. And I think the only really optimistic thing I could say is that at least this is Trump's final term. He can't run for another term. Okay, that would be against our laws, and that would get into some very nasty areas. So we definitely don't want to go that route. So at the very least, it's 4 more years, and I do have some videos on that, but that's going to sort of evolve as we discuss more Palestine on the channel. So once again, thank you for watching. Take care. Be safe. And we'll see you on the next one.